You're watching the presentation about impact of World War I on revolution in Russia, presented by Lana Slusar.
I was born in USSR, a country that came to existence because of Great October Socialist Revolution. As a student in school, I was taught that World War I was to make rich even richer. However, I didn't know that map of Europe changed a lot after the World War I. Countries from different continents participated in the war. Russia lost a lot of land, and World War I impacted Russian Revolution. World War I was a horrible war. Many lives were lost. The war was taking place on two fronts, Western and Eastern. It was fought between Central Powers that included Germany and Austria-Hungary and Entente powers that included Russia Empire, France, and British Empire. This war was meant to be finished in about 6 weeks. Unfortunately, it continued for about 4 years, resulting in devastations and hardships for many countries. As a result of World War I, the map of Europe has changed. Some countries ceased to exist, borders have shifted, new countries have emerged. Note how much land Russia has lost. Now, how did this happen?
A number of alliances had been signed by countries between the years 1879 and 1914. They meant that some countries had no option but to declare war if one of their allies goes to war.
Some of the causes of World War I included imperialism.
By 1900, the British Empire extended over 5 continents. France controlled large areas of Africa. Germany opposed Britain's and France's land ownership. Industrialism required new markets.
Militarism.
The armies of both France and Germany had more than doubled between 1870 and 1914. There was fierce competition between Britain and Germany for mastery of the seas.
Unrest in Europe.
The unrest was among many nationalities in Austria-Hungary. People were unsatisfied with their position in the empire. For example, Serbs wanted to take over Slavic Bosnia and have freedom from the Austria-Hungary. Russia had an autocratic power led by Tsar Nicholas II and had stunning gulf between statuses of people, such as peasants and nobles or aristocrats, followed by revolutionary movement. Kaiser William II, the ruler of Germany, insulted France by letting German troops march through the Arc of Triumph in Paris. Great Britain had difficulties with Ireland and India, who wanted their independence.
Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
The incident that happened in Sarajevo led to outbreak of the war. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a member of Black Hand, a Slavic terrorist organization, in Serbia on June 28, 1914. Kaiser insisted that Austria-Hungary declare war on Serbia and promised Germany's full support. Serbia turned to Russia for help. Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov, also known as Nicholas II, was the last of Romanov's dynasty and the head of Russia during World War I. Russia, acting as a big brother of all Slavs, entered the war to protect Serbia. Considering instability and social unrest in Russia at the time, it wasn't wise for Russia to enter the war. For instance, in the Battle of Tannenberg, the Russian army was severely beaten, suffering 120,000 casualties to Germany's 20,000. In addition, numerous losses and setbacks made Nicholas take personal control of the army in 1915. This brought blame to all the failures on Nicholas II personally. By this time, Russia was sending untrained troops to the front with little or no equipment. Army was in almost continual retreat. By 1916, morale in the army reached its all-time low, and civilian unrest in the country was growing exponentially. On February 23, 1917, the International Women's Day festival in St. Petersburg turned into a city-wide demonstration as weary women workers left factories to protest against food shortages. Men soon joined them, and on the following day, encouraged by political and social activists, the crowds had swollen and virtually every industry, shop and enterprise had ceased to function, as almost the entire population went on strike. Nicholas ordered the police and military to intervene. However, the military was no longer loyal to the Tsar, and many mutinied and joined the people in demonstrations. Fights broke out and the whole city was in chaos. On October 28, over 80,000 troops mutinied from the army, and looting and rioting was widespread. Faced with this situation, Tsar Nicholas abdicated his throne, handing power to his brother Michael. Michael accepted leadership but resigned the following day, leaving Russia without a head of state. After the abdication of Romanovs, a provisional government was formed by leading members of the Duma and recognized internationally as Russia's legal government. It was to rule Russia until elections could be held. However, its power wasn't stable. Alexander Kerensky, the head of provisional government, and the others were liberal, moderate, and conservative socialists. They tried to establish democracy in Russia, but their reforms were ineffective and only increased the rebellion of workers. Instead of exiting the war due to tremendous unrest in the country and focusing on returning people's trust, provisional government continued to send troops to the war. The situation in Russia was calling for someone to take advantage of it. This person was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov Lenin. Lenin had spent most of the 20th century in exile, working and campaigning in Europe because he was persecuted by Tsarist regime, as he was known socialist and the enemy of the state. He negotiated a return to Russia from Switzerland with German authorities because he was willing to take steps to withdraw Russia from war. In Russia, Lenin spent much time preparing for overthrowing the provisional government by convincing workers, soldiers and peasants to stand up for revolution. Lenin appealed to people by promising bread, peace and land, and all power to the Soviets. Lenin and his Bolshevik party organized workers, peasants and soldiers, and on October 25th, following the signal from armored cruiser Aurora, Bolsheviks, in campaign with Red Guards, stormed the Winter Palace and seized the ministers of provisional government. Post offices, railroads and other major infrastructures were also occupied by Bolsheviks. Tsar's ministers were arrested. Former Tsarist forces surrendered. Nicholas II and his family were later executed by Lenin's order. The Bolsheviks, later called Communists, took total control, bringing Lenin to power. Lenin immediately started negotiating with Central Powers and got Russia out of war on December 16, 1917. Consequently losing much of land and letting Germans to concentrate more on Western Front, which was stunning to French and British.
Without even getting deep into details, we can clearly see the impact of the World War I on Russian Revolution and the whole world. If there was no World War I and the desperation it brought to Russia, Kerensky might have succeeded with his democratic reforms in Russia, which would greatly weaken political position of Bolsheviks. Lenin would not have a chance to play his bread, peace, and land card, and 70 years of tyranny of communism in Russia wouldn't happen.